Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We're going to get started with our feature presentation in about 1 minute. Well, happy Halloween to all my ghosts, ghouls, goblins, and other creatures of the night. Thank you for joining us today. Today's Lunch and Learn will be the haunted history of Fredericksburg, in which I will tell you the 7 of the most famous ghost stories of our area. Let's get started, shall we? Our first ghost up is the Lady of Chatham. Chatham was built in 1768 by William Fitzhugh, a wealthy local planter who was closely involved with the growing patriot movement in the colony of Virginia. During the Revolutionary War, Fitzhugh was one of the managers of one of the area's gunworks that supplied armaments to the Continental Army. Amongst the many guests to Chatham over the years were George Washington, who was a friend of Fitzhugh, and Thomas Jefferson, Fitzhugh's cousin by marriage. Fitzhugh sold Chatham in 1806, and it had several owners until it was bought by J. Horace Lacey in 1859. In 1862, Abraham Lincoln visited Chatham's renamed the Lacey House to have a strategy session with his top advisors, making it the only known residence in the United States to have George Washington and Abraham Lincoln both sleep under its roof. After the Battle of Fredericksburg, Chatham became a hospital for Union troops, and many notable United States such as Clara Barton, Walt Whitman, and Dr. Mary Edwards Walker, the first woman to be awarded the Medal of Honor, tended to the wounded. Chatham is also home to perhaps Fredericksburg's most famous ghost story. Legend tells that a young woman from a high-class family in England fell in love and planned to marry a common working man. After her parents couldn't keep them apart, they decided to send their daughter to stay with the Fitzhugh family, hoping that absence did not make the heart grow fonder. Unbeknownst to them, the man decided to follow his love across the sea, and they intended to elope. On the night they had decided to make their grand escape, the lady slipped out of Chatham and went down to the river, only to step into the arms of George Washington. Washington had overheard the man's plan in one of the local taverns, had the man detained, and went to the meeting himself to stop the young woman and save the reputation of his friend William Fitzhugh. The young woman was promptly sent back to England, married to a suitable man, and gave him 10 children. But on her death, she declared that her heart would always be at Chatham, waiting for her true love. And now, once every 7 years, on June 21st, between the hours of noon and midnight, her ghost appears somewhere on Chatham's ground. Her next appearance is slated for June 21st, 2028. The chimneys. Most commonly called the chimneys due to its 2 prominent chimneys on either side of the house. This original Georgian home was built around 1772 by Charles Yates. It was later owned by prosperous tobacco merchant and Scottish immigrant John Glassell, and was also the childhood home of Nell Hurden, the wife of President Chester A. Arthur. Over the years, the chimneys has served as a private residence and various shops and restaurants. Some claim there is a supernatural element surrounding the property. Empty rocking chairs, the sound of footsteps on stairs, and breaking china are just some of the odd occurrences that have happened over the years. No one has ever been able to identify what ghost has made these visitations or how many spirits inhabit the house. Once a young girl playing the piano and quietly singing to herself, heard someone approaching her and sit right down next to her, only to discover that no one was there. Another time, a mother went to check on her son to discover two boys in his bed. When she asked the next morning who the guest had been, he informed her that he was alone throughout the entire night. One ghost story, though, is believed to have finally moved on from the place. During a paranormal investigation by Mark Nesbitt with medium Julia Pellegrino some years ago, they discovered in the basement the spirit of Nicodemus, an escaped slave on the Underground Railroad, awaiting someone called Hattie to bring them their papers. Apparently, he was once in a group that received their papers to leave, but Nicodemus sadly didn't, and they said they would come back for him. But unfortunately, they never did. During this, Mrs. Pellegrino smelled smoke and believed that Nicodemus may have died of smoke inhalation during one of the fires that ravaged Fredericksburg. Miss Pellegrino and Mr. Nesbitt informed Nicodemus that he was no longer needed papers and was free to go. Both of them felt a freezing sensation on their hands for a moment, and it was gone, and Nicodemus' presence hasn't been felt since. The White Lady of St. George's Episcopal Church. The current St. George Episcopal Church was built in 1849 and is the third bearing that name on that site. The original church was built in the 1730s and was the first church in Fredericksburg. It was where members of the Washington family would have worshiped. The second church was built in 1813. In the colonial period, the church was by law responsible for less fortunate members of the community, such as widows, orphans, the sick, and the needy. From 1795 until 1802, it operated charity schools for both boys and girls. The present building has seen many changes. The city clock in the tower was placed there in 1851. The side galleries were added in 1854 after a fire. The gorgeous stained glass windows that were associated with the church today were not added until the 20th century. They included 3 Tiffany windows and a window dedicated to Mary Washington. The graveyard dates back to the first church. The oldest existing tombstone is 1752. Martha Washington's father is buried here, as well as the brother of John Paul Jones. While mysterious lights have been known to be seen in the cemetery, the most famous ghost of the church hasn't appeared for over 100 years. In 1858, a young woman, Ella McCarthy, came early to the church for her choir practice in the choir loft. She looked out and noticed a woman dressed in white and a veil kneeling at the altar in prayer. The woman stood and looked at Ella. Beneath the veil lay the face of a sad and troubled woman. Ella tried to call to ask her if she needed help, but before she could, the woman disappeared and has not been seen since that day. While the identity of the ghost has remained unknown, some believe that Betty Lewis, sister of George Washington and wife of Fielding Lewis, came to pay respects to her husband. No investigation has been done on the lady due to the church wishing privacy for all their parishioners, current and former. Fielding Lewis of Kenmore. Built in the 1770s by Fielding Lewis for his second wife, Betty Washington, the house originally sat on a much bigger plot of land that was subdivided after it was sold in 1799. While now referred to as Kenmore, it was actually not called that until the ownership of Samuel Gordon in 1819. The house and the grounds are iconic. Probably the most famous feature of the house are the amazing fireplaces and ceilings, some of the finest colonial decorative plasterwork in the country, and share the artist with the gorgeous ceilings at Betty's brother's house, Mount Vernon. Fielding Lewis was an adamant supporter of the Revolutionary War and his brother-in-law, George Washington. He was one of the principal managers of the gun manufacturers and almost bankrupted himself and his family to maintain its operation through the Revolutionary War. He died in December of 1781. His widow, Betty Washington Lewis, managed the 11,000-acre estate until 1796. Some say Fielding Lewis may have never left Kenmore. Throughout the years, many visitors said they have seen Fielding Lewis at his desk upstairs, brooding over his finances, causing him worry long after his death. Of Smith Cottage. Smith's Cottage is a building with a mysterious past. Some believe it was originally built in the 1830s as a blacksmith shop, and others imply, as the name implies, but the tax records of the building go back only to the 1850s. Our story today is concerned with its role during the Civil War and the former occupant that may have never left. Two conflicting stories exist about what Smith Cottage was during the Civil War. The more colorful telling of it was that it was a local bordello and was run by a woman named Elizabeth. Many say that story is patently untrue and meant to discredit Elizabeth, who lived in Smith's Cottage at the time of the Civil War. While Elizabeth's husband, John, was a Confederate soldier, Elizabeth was said to have offered aid to the Union Army when it was in Fredericksburg. When her husband found out, he left her and poor Elizabeth took her own life. Every once in a while, a door will mysteriously open and close, and no explanation. An item will move and no one touching it, and an other unexplained phenomenon. While some will write it off as a trick of the light or an overactive imagination, others claim Elizabeth may have never left the cottage. John Fraser of Rising Sun Tavern. Originally built in 1762, the tavern was at first a home to Charles Washington, younger brother to George. It became a tavern in 1792, known as the Eagle or the Golden Eagle, later renamed the Rising Sun in 1823. On the bottom floor is a parlor for well-bred women, another for well-bred men, and of course a third for the common man. In this last room, you will notice that the area that holds the alcohol is protected from the public by bars, and you had to order from an area that had a grill that went up and down. This is actually where the term bar and grill comes from, as this was very common in the day. Also, make certain to mind your P's and Q's, which stand for pints and quarts. Upstairs are a few rooms that were shared by wealthier families or gentlemen who would share not only the room, but the bed as well. If you were a poor man, you could pay to sleep on the floor in the common room. Poor women were not allowed in. But while it's now a museum, one of the tavern keepers, John Fraser, seems to have never checked out. I have recently been told numerous stories about this mischievous ghost from a former Rising Sun Tavern volunteer that I will be sharing with you today. This happened in the early 2000s when a docent and their daughter were there before it opened. They brought with them a CD player that they plugged in at the bar area, one of the areas that had plugs. The docent had a Barbra Streisand CD that she was playing and doing some odds and ends before opening, and she heard the CD player doing something weird. The daughter walked into the bar area to take a look at the CD player and had started playing everything backwards, like someone was holding down the back button and letting the songs play that way. Not only that, the digital numbers on the front of the player started going backwards as well, starting from 99. There were only about 15 songs on that CD. Needless to say, they unplugged the CD player and didn't play it anymore that morning. There was a docent who we will call M, and she was always picked on by John Fraser. The docents at the tavern wore colonial costumes, which included a mop hat, which was covered all of their hair. M would stand in the middle of the great room and give a tour to customers, and her hat would get pulled off her head. There was no one around her at all, as she was in a roped-off area. She would pick up her hat, put it back on, and within a minute, it would get pulled off again. This hat was secured with elastic, so it could not fall off her head, and again, no one outside of the paranormal was around her. She would pick the hat back up again and then scold John Fraser, telling him to leave her alone. She would put her hat back on, and it would stay on her head with no issue after that. Jay would volunteer during special events to usher people out the back through the gift shop. She dressed in period costume, and her shoes were ballet flats with a tie over the toe. The tie was just for show, but it could be tied and untied. Jay would usher customers out the building and would be standing in one place for a long time. She looked down during a break in customers and her right shoe was untied. So she tied it and checked the left to make sure it was still tied. Jay looked back at the right shoe. It was untied again. So she tied it back and double knotted it so it would be secure. She looked down a few minutes later and the shoe was untied again. She asked out loud for John to leave her shoes alone, please, and he stopped for the rest of the evening. In the winter, the hours of the tavern are certain to during daylight hours only. So they, instead of running from 9 to 5, would usually only run from 10 until 4. Sometimes, though, customers would come in at the last minute and want a tour. So the Dawsons would oblige, making it dark when they leave. The last person in the building would turn off all the lights, lock the front door, and set the alarms. Then they would exit by the back door and lock it. No lights would be left on in the morning. Many nights, a light would turn on in the middle of the night and it would still be on in the morning when the next person came to work. The light switches were in the basement, so no one could turn it on without setting off the alarm. One time, one of the Dawsons, Kay, was the closer, and she would make sure everything was turned off and the alarm set, then out the back door. By the time she got to the front of the building, a light would be on again, specifically in the hallway. So she would again go back in, disarm the alarm, and turn everything off again. She would reset the alarm and leave. Again, by the time she got to the front of the building, the light was on after she knew she turned it off. By that point, she just said that John wanted the light on, so she would give him what he wanted one way or another. She just hoped that he would be kind enough to not make the electricity bill too high. November, specifically around the Thanksgiving holiday, is the most active time for John. He died upstairs in one of the rooms, which was odd because he was the tavern keeper but did not actually live there. There is some mystery around the fact that he died in late November, hence the activity level. Several years after the Washington Heritage Museum got possession of the tavern, a copy of the original last liquor license was found. It was framed and is still on display in the tavern, and a dedication ceremony was scheduled to be held. One of John Fraser's descendants was available to present the framed license in the ceremony. At the top of the stairs, there is a cast iron candle holder, which is very heavy and is never moved. During the ceremony, the candle holder was knocked over and thrown down the stairs. No one was upstairs at the time, and it was too heavy to fall over on its own. They believe that John was not happy that he was not the center of attention. His family member was. No one was hurt, and there was no property damage, but a ghost with a bruised ego. Katina of Fall Hill. The Thornton family arrived in Fredericksburg in the early 1800s and originally lived in a house called The Falls on modern-day Princess Anne Street, where the George Washington Executive Building is located in the 1720s. Francis Thornton acquired 8,000 acres to become the family estate in 1722. The current Fall Hills Mansion was built in the late 1770s and narrowly missed being destroyed in the Battle of Fredericksburg, where it was held at a strategic point for the Confederate Army. Butler Franklin, the last of the Thornton family to own the home, said that Robert E. Lee wished to destroy the house in order to better see the Union Army. But luckily, the Union Army changed direction and the house was saved. Falls Hill was in the Thornton family for 280 years, but it was sold in 1999 and remains a private residence. The ghost of Falls Hill is a kind and gentle spirit. Cantina was a Sioux Indian slave that was originally gifted to Governor Alexander Spotswood and remained with his family until the governor's death, where she was passed on to the Thornton family, where she was assigned to be a nursemaid and raised 3 generations of Thornton children before she passed in 1777. Katina was greatly loved by the family and loved them in return, so much so that some claim she never left. Many visitors to and residents of Fall Hill have reported seeing a woman with long, dark braids around the property, especially in rooms inhabited by children, as if she were still taking care of them. One visitor, Alice Dixon, in the late 1930s, was awoken one night by a young, crying boy in colonial period clothing being comforted by an old woman with braids. Miss Dickinson originally thought the family was trying to amuse her until they disappeared when she spoke to them. Originally thought to no longer inhabit the grounds after a storm buried her burial spot, the newest residents of Falls Hill has said to have felt her kind and caring hand in the house, such as trying to cover the children with a blanket, comforting them, and helping the mother. Thank you for joining us today. Here are some of the resources I used in order to do today's presentation. But that's not all. I know some of you are asking, where are more ghost stories? And especially, where are the ghost stories of the library itself? Well, join us on November 1st at 3 p.m. at the Fredericksburg Branch Library for more ghost stories of Fredericksburg, especially dealing with the library itself and other local environments. Until then, happy haunting!